Well, I think that's a good segue to talk about Zoran Mandani. But though with regards to Iran, I think both of our predictions are that this truce will not hold long and that we will be kind of right back where we are now in maybe a few months. So we'll check back on that. But with regards to Zoran Mandani, something that I think should be appreciated is New York City is like if not one of the major centers of Zionism in the United States. It's the largest Jewish population outside of Israel live in New York City. So the fact that you have Zoran Mandani as now the Democratic nominee, he still has to win a general election in November, but he has very good odds of doing so. And he's on record as somebody who wants to end U.S. tax funding for illegal Israeli settlements. He said that if Benjamin Netanyahu comes to New York City, he will arrest him. I mean, this is very radical stuff. And I think it actually does, as much as I made the point online that in the history of civilization, one of the biggest things to understand is, the wealthiest elements of society are willing to kill fucking everybody in order to not have just 5% of their wealth taken away. So I think that does explain some of the psychotic reaction you've seen to Zoran, but I think the Israel stuff is actually probably the main reason, where they're seeing that somebody who is anti-Israel can actually do well here, and there's a big constituency for it. And in fact, it's quite funny. And with regards to Zoran, I want to talk a bit about kind of wokeness or idpol or whatever. But a friend of the show, Michael Tracy, was pointing out that they ran this hysterical campaign about Zoran's going to, bring back the pogroms, and Zoran is Joseph Goebbels, and the same kind of thing they tried against Jeremy Corbyn. But Michael Tracy found, a Zoran tweet from 2020, which Zoran says, quote, "Queer liberation means defund the police," unquote. And so it's like they got so obsessed, like these Zionists are so oblivious, they just don't realize everybody hates them. And they got so obsessed with, he's against Israeli genocide, so that means he's an anti-Semite. Let's just call him an anti-Semite a bunch, that will work. They went so in on this anti-Semitism thing that it wasn't until like the day after he won the primary that anybody bothered to go back and find his old defund the police, his old kind of woke tweets that they could have been, putting everywhere and kind of discrediting him for the last month or so. But I want to talk about that. But before we get there, just generally, what, if anything, do you think the results of the New York mayor Democratic primary mean for the U.S. left, and what were your takeaways?
Well, of course, we have to remember getting elected is just the first bit. People can always be intimidated and changed after they get into power. So, you can never... we're old and cynical. We have to assume that the worst. So we don't know what he will actually do in power. In terms of his platform, I was looking at it, and aside from the law and order stuff, which I don't agree with, I thought the rest of it is all good stuff. I mean, I agree with all of it. It's people are not going to just give you rights without asking for them, right? Like tenants have to keep, as much pressure as they can in order for, life to be livable at all. Because landlords obviously have, more money and power to use. So, yeah, all of that pro-tenant, we'll say, policies are great. And these are reforms, I mean, this is not like they keep saying about, what a radical is and so on. But these are very sensible reforms, which, are achievable and will make life better for people, for most people who are tenants, in New York. I think you said it's like a majority tenant city, which is,
about,
of course,
about 70% of New Yorkers rent as opposed to owning.
So of course his thing is popular, because and that's what he was mainly running on. That was his primary message, and most people are just going to associate him with that, and they're going to say, yes, that I want that will make my life better.
Well, just a funny moment from the campaign was Zoran came out with this ad where, 30-second ad where he says, yes, I'm going to freeze your rent. He goes around to a bunch of different people, says, I'm going to freeze your rent. And all the Noah Smith type, Matt Iglesias, all the, the Four Eyes started coming on Twitter and saying, actually rent control doesn't work and it discourages developers and it will actually exacerbate, the rent prop. And all of, he just like every fucking economist, F-word person came out at once to say that, no, this isn't going to work. This is bad. Yes, he's like so economically ignorant. But what that kind of backlash did was it just made everybody aware that Zoran Mandani's platform was he's going to freeze your rent.
Right.
So, again, these people are just so ignorant, these wonk people.
Yeah.
They think, that they are the experts and that they're going to tell everybody that this doesn't work and that's going to do something to discredit it. But in reality, it's like, it just kind of spreads this message because a lot of people wouldn't have been aware that that was his platform until then. And I think that's when you really saw him take off in the polls is once his rent freeze proposal became so publicized thanks to people attacking it.
Yeah, I mean, I would just think, as anyone living in New York, I would just think, just take a chance on that guy. Maybe it won't amount to anything, but, anything that's pro-tenant would be just an instant yes. And then, the thing that he's worst on is definitely the law and order stuff. I mean, I didn't look into it very deeply, but, I mean, it sounded like to me from reading the description of it on his website that it's sort of going to be almost like this army of therapists or something there to like soothe the mentally deranged. I don't know, but I still totally get why people would want to vote for him and. I mean, like you say, it's simply it is an objective. You can see it as an objective class thing in the sense that tenants are going to vote for pro-tenant stuff. Yeah,
his plan is he's going to get a better health therapist for the homeless guy who peed on my shoe when I opened the subway door. But no, and actually, what you were saying earlier, I find it endlessly amusing. Maybe it's not amusing because it has real consequences, but this just kind of anti-communist hysteria where Franklin Delano Roosevelt is actually, I think, a great example of this, where his entire thing was, I'm trying to save capitalism during the Great Depression. That's what he said explicitly. And the thanks they gave him was the business plot, where they did plot to coup him with Smedley Butler, have the military coup him, or a bunch of veterans coup him, and then replace him with a fascist government. And that was exposed, and these were major industrialists that were in on this plan to have a fascist coup instead of Franklin Roosevelt. And Roosevelt, for whatever reason, probably recognizing the powers there, just kind of quietly covered it up and it didn't happen. And then I would argue it happened for real with JFK in 1963. But it's always fascinating to me because, again, these guys, Kennedy, Roosevelt, these are not communists, but they talk about them like they're Joseph Stalin. And again, with Zoran Mandani, this guy, he's kind of a DSA social democrat. He's a European social democrat. His plan, you see all these right-wingers on Twitter freaking out about how he's going to like bring back bread lines, because his plan is to open 5 city-owned grocery stores to subsidize food.
You know what's going to happen too? If he does that, there's going to be a queue. And
yes.
They're going to take pictures of the queue, and they're going to be like, "Oh my God!"
Like the New York Post is going to have a hammer and sickle on the front page.
You don't have to go to that grocery.
Right. The hammer and sickle grocery store, as seen on the New York Post, because there will be some sort of line because you can save, 75 cents on a loaf of bread or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's literally, the plan is to put one of these in every borough. The 5 boroughs of New York, each of them gets one. That's it. Everything else is going to, but it's just like, and again, this stuff is, Norway has a state-owned oil company, but these people are so hysterical that this is Joseph Stalin, Vladimir Lenin, and And I think it's unfortunate because, with regards to the Israel stuff, I think what we need more than anything else in terms of organizational power, in terms of a mass movement in the United States, we need some sort of anti-war movement. We need some sort of the people like Thomas Massey, who I do respect a lot, because it's just the Congress needs to assert the power to make war. We can't have a president beholden to Israel just bombing people willy-nilly. You need to have that kind of power and responsibility diffused. And I think kind of the negative polarization where everybody on the right thinks these people are like race communists or whatever, and people on the left think everyone on the right's a racist Nazi. I think just this kind of negative polarization unfortunately has real consequences, but it's still quite hilarious to see how much they freak out about just a Danish social democrat, basically. Maybe a slightly more woke Danish social democrat won the mayoral primary, and they're acting like Stalin and Mao Zedong is going to be elected in November.
Yeah, and the underlying point for me is always that, like you were kind of saying with FDR, it would be saving their own system.
Yes.
Not just the economic system, but actually the country. You have to, somebody other than you has to have a buy-in. Like somebody has to, the people have to believe in the possibility that that things can be reformed, or else you're going to have violence. If in foreign policy, other countries have to have some buy-in to what you're doing. They have to benefit in some way to what you're doing. If they don't, and if your position is nobody but us can have any sovereignty, and if they try, we will execute their leaders, we will do color revolutions, we will go to war on them, then like Michael Hudson said, you've galvanized the whole world against you. And so even if, whatever the timeline of this is, those are two irreconcilable problems, domestic and foreign. And a little bit of social democracy and, foreign policy, yeah, that would have been perhaps a bit more of a radical change. But, there's no easy way out of this at this point. And so people are going to be going, oh my God, I'm like, nothing ever happens. And then, the world is ending. Kind of, they're just going to be going over and back like several times a day between these two positions, according to the news cycle of the hour. But ultimately, like, these things are much more long term. And that possibility for, I suppose you could say the possibility for reform domestically is still somewhat conceivable. On foreign policy, it has to be radical. I don't see how you now have multiple large, well-armed, countries that want America to fall, including two superpowers. Russia is a military superpower. And, by the way, just today I was looking at some interesting analysis on China. Before, in previous episodes, we've talked about, to what extent China is a peer or superior competitor or not. And basically, it was a analysis of Peter Zeihan, right? And the guy, the analyst was making his case that Peter Zeihan's belief that China will collapse is wrong. And it was actually quite policy wonkish, in a good way. It had lots of data. And he made a very interesting case. He was speaking specifically about China, but he made an interesting case that you can extrapolate from for other countries. And he was basically showing examples of countries whose in relatively recent times the population has gone up and productivity has gone down, and other countries where the population has declined and productivity has gone up. It's not that one follows from the other, but that you can use policy to go either way. And so, in other words, if you have the wrong policy, you can become less productive despite having more people, and vice versa. And so he also debunked the idea that, I'll share a link to it in the description of the show, but he also shared an example of how, so that huge question, right, about the population collapse that they're all hoping for, made me think, I wonder how many of these kind of analysts, have been giving policymakers in the West bad ideas. That this was a certainty that China was going to collapse from this demographic thing. And the other thing was that Peter Zeihan and lots of the anti-China people believe that that basically Xi, it's an authoritarian communist regime, so Xi is surrounded by yes men because they don't have democracy like us. And so he's not getting any negative feedback, and so he can't make good policy. The government can't make good policy choices. Now, that always seemed kind of wrong to me straight away, because they really are excellent at like bureaucracy, basically, right? They're like policy obsessed, they have like a whole army of probably the biggest army of policy thinkers and makers in the world. And so this analyst was saying that they've actually made really rational and non-ideological or dogmatic decisions, like very, considered and rational decisions in terms of just about any policy you can think of. He named some examples, and one of them was modernizing the Navy. So I mean, that's another part of this story too, where, these analysts have been presumably telling people. So, I mean, the irony is basically the analysts believe that Xi is surrounded by yes men who can't tell him what's real because they don't have democracy, when in all likelihood that is actually what's going on in America, right?
Yes.
Because those very people are telling the policymakers that, you just have to do as much immigration as possible, and they won't do it because they're authoritarian and not a democracy, and so they will just collapse one day.